Welcome to this short talk from BroilerNet about slower growing broiler chickens. My name is Margret Vonholdt-Wenker and this is my colleague Malchow. We are both scientific employees at the Friedrich-Löffler Institute in Germany, and as part of BroilerNet we will today say something short about animal welfare and animal health benefits and challenges for slower growing breeds. So today we will talk about why should we actually consider to use slower growing genetics in the broiler sector? And also to explain this a bit more, we will highlight some scientific insights regarding animal health and welfare. So just to make sure that we're all on the same page and we know what we mean when we talk about slow growing breeds, we would like to give a short overview with some examples. As most of you know, Ross 308 are the fast-growing broiler breeds that are used nowadays in the broiler industry. This is in the chicken in the picture completely to the right. Then there are medium-growing breeds that grow a bit slower, and then there are the slower-growing breeds such as the Loma Dual, which is a dual-purpose chicken, but also the Hubbard YA 757. They grow about 35 to 45 grams a day. This is in the picture, the chicken in the middle. And this is what we talk about in this presentation when we mean slower growing breeds. They are mainly used in certification schemes. Whereas on the other side, there are also slow growing genetics. Those are chickens that are growing around 15 to 20 grams a day. They are mainly used in alternative and organic systems. And this would be the chicken in the picture completely to the left. So why are we actually considering genetics? Well, the breeding companies have done a great job over the last years to make our broiler chickens more efficient. The chickens are now producing a lot of meat at very low cost, and they are super efficient with their resources, which also is good for sustainability. However, at the same time, we see that this fast growth also has some downsides, and there are several challenges arising nowadays, such as welfare concerns when it comes to those breeds. We see meat quality issues, and also there are more and more social concerns when it comes to fast-growing broilers. So one of the challenges that we see in fast-growing broilers nowadays are that they are reaching their physical limits. So the birds are growing that fast that actually their muscles and their skeleton cannot carry the weight anymore. And especially at the end of the fattening phase, we see that the birds can hardly move, which has, of course, welfare implications because they can no longer express certain behaviors that they would actually like to because their body cannot move anymore. At the same time, we see that the fast-growing broilers suffer from painful welfare problems related to litter quality. When the birds are growing that fast, it's very hard to keep the litter quality that high to avoid problems with, for example, food pet health. They get painful spots on their feet. We see hog burns, but also blisters on the chest. And this not only affects the welfare of the birds, but also the meat quality in the slaughterhouse. At the same time, we also see that there are meat quality issues related to fast-growing broiler chickens, such as white striping, wooden breast, and spaghetti meat. This leads to losses in the slaughterhouse, which is in the end, of course, a loss of resources, and this is something we would like to avoid in terms of sustainability. At last, like I already said, there are some societal concerns when it comes to the welfare of those birds, and we also see that welfare NGOs are more and more attacking the sector, but also specific companies such as supermarkets when it comes to the use of those breeds. They actually would like the companies to change to slower growing genetics and therefore have some harsh campaigning. And at the same time, we see that European consumers are getting more and more concerned about welfare as well. And we have now many companies already signing the Better Chicken commitments to actually improve the welfare of broiler chickens. Of course, the challenges that I just mentioned can also be solved partly by better management, reducing the stocking density, and providing enrichment. But the question that we would like to address today is, can slower growing strains also be part of the solution? We do see that this is relevant as we see in several countries more and more label programs including slower growing genetics as a requirement for the farms who want to join the label. Also here in Germany, we see that there is an increase in the uptake of slower growing broiler breeds. For example, there is an inter-trade agreement. As you can see, it's called Haltungsform, and it ranges from 1 to 5, whereas level 1 represents the conventional farming with conventional broiler farms. Then level 2 includes those farms that provide a lower stocking density and more space for the chicken. And then from level 3 and upwards, there are even more requirements to improve welfare on farms. And at the same time, one of the requirements is to use slower growing breeds that grow not faster than 45 grams a day. At the same time, we also see that supermarkets are making more and more efforts to change to slower growing breeds. So for example, here Aldi has the goal to sell 100% of its fresh chicken meat by 2030, originating only from slower growing breeds. And at the same time, Lidl has actually the goal for this year to sell 50% of the fresh meat originating from slower growing breeds. So now we would like to go into a bit more detail when it comes to scientific results for animal welfare and animal health, benefits and challenges for slower growing breeds. And here my colleague Julia Malchow will take over.
Thank you very much, Margret. Yes, in my part, I would like to introduce you to the benefits and concepts of slower growing broiler chickens in terms of animal welfare and animal health. We will not discuss the topics of meat quality and sustainability here. Let's start with the topic animal welfare. Growing broilers show a better walking ability compared to fast-growing broilers. They also show a higher locomotor activity. Here's a diagram showing the average daily inactivity. Fast growing here with the blue line indicated, slower growing brown lines and grey lines, and very slow growing broilers here indicated by the yellow line were compared. In general, all genetics show an increase in activity. However, especially in the first week of life, the slower growing broilers show less activity than the fast growing ones. It is also interesting to note that all genetics show a similar level of inactivity from the 8th week of life onwards. A further benefit of the slower growing broiler is a higher frequency of performing species-specific behavior, such as perching. All chickens have the tendency to roost. Even very young chickens show perching behavior in the first days of life, including broilers. Furthermore, the slower growing broilers show more comfort behavior, such as dust bathing, what you can see here on the picture, or preening, which leads to increased plumage care. In addition, the animals also show enhanced play behavior, with more running, frolicking, wing flapping, or spurring. Due to the higher activity and higher frequency of species-specific behavior, slower growing broilers have a different need for housing environments, such as enrichment, than fast-growing broilers. In addition, housing management must be organized differentially, as slower growing broilers are kept in lower stocking densities and longer fattening phases, for instance. Furthermore, they are often kept in outdoor climate area, what you can see here on the right side. Another point that must be taken into account when keeping slower growing broilers is the ambient temperature. The animals do not have as high metabolism as the fast growing broilers, especially after the first plumage has been pushed. Cold stress can also occur at cool outside temperature in, for instance, mobile houses, what you can see here below. As I mentioned on the previous slides, the slower growing broilers have different needs in terms of the housing environment. On the one hand, it has been shown that fast growing broilers, shown here with the black bars, perch less than slower growing broilers when perch are provided. Furthermore, we were able to show a comparison of 3 different genetics, which differed in growth intensity. That when perches and grids were offered at the same time, the grids, shown in white, were used more than perches in all 3 genetics. However, the perches were also used by the slow-growing broilers. I have to add here that it was not a 100% choice experiment, as the perches and grids did not offer enough space for all the animals at the same time. Due to the longer fattening period and higher activity, this can lead to increased agnostic interaction and aggression in slower growing broilers. There is also a higher risk of feather packing due to various factors. Let's move on to the topic of animal health and its benefits and concerns. Slower growing broilers have better food pads and hocks. I have a diagram here which shows the development of food pad quality over 5 years. On the one hand, we can see that the food pad quality of fast-growing broilers, here in the black line, has increased, and slower-growing broilers, so the orange and the blue line, have fluctuated over time. However, we can also clearly see that the slower-growing broilers have a significantly better food pad quality than the fast-growing broilers. Furthermore, it can be concluded that the slower-growing broilers have a better plumage condition. The diagram shows different genetics of slower and fast-growing broilers, whereby the plumage has been recorded using a 3-stage scoring system. Score 0 means that there is no pollution, and score 2 means that the plumage is heavily soiled. What we see here is that with a score of 0, only slower-growing animals can be found. With score 2, we find all genetic, but the slower-growing ones to a lesser extent than the fast-growing broilers. Slower-growing broiler chickens show less heart and vascular disease. Fewer antibiotics are used during rearing period, and the animals have fewer bone deformities. Another benefit of slower-growing broilers is lower mortality. In the table shown here, it was demonstrated that slower-growing broilers have a lower mortality rate compared to fast-growing broilers. Furthermore, housing systems such as floor housing have no direct influence on mortality compared to free-range housing. Due to the longer fattening phase, it is not completely clear which vaccination program can actually be used for slower-growing broilers. The variation in growth intensities also plays a major role here. The more extensive rearing of slower-growing broilers increase other risks to animal health, such as the risk of exposure and accumulation of pathogens. For example, viral pathogens, high pathogen avian influenza, or bacterial pathogens, the Campylobacter. Similar to the vaccination program, the feed composition has not been fully clarified due to the longer growth phase. However, there are already indications that slower-growing broilers are less demanding in terms of protein quality, which also favors the use of alternative protein source for soya. This is my last slide, on which I would like to briefly summarize the benefits and concerns mentioned. On the subject of animal welfare, species-specific behavior should be taken into account, just as suitable housing systems should be offered. On the subject animal health, it can be said in brief that mortality and antibiotic use is reduced in slower-growing broiler chickens, but the vaccination program and the feed composition have not yet been fully clarified due to the longer fattening period phase. I would like to thank you to watching our video and our talk. And if you have questions, just write us an email. You can find our email here. Or also you can visit our BroilerNet website. You can scan the code or use the link broilernet.eu. And yeah, we are happy to hear from you. Thank you very much.